Welcome to my channel. Sit back and listen to the best true crime stories. Let's go.
Gods and Monsters. The Assassination of Gianni Versace. Introduction. July 15, 1997, Miami Beach, Florida. The bright summer sun shines through the thin curtains into a large, bright bedroom. The weather is wonderful, with a cool breeze blowing outside the window and birds chirping somewhere in the distance. The owner of the house opens his eyes reluctantly under the pressure of the sun's annoying rays. As usual, he takes a glass of water from his bedside table and empties it in a gulp. After a little while, the man rises from the bed and looks out the window, directly at the sea stretching not far from the majestic mansion. After waking up, the owner of the house decides to get dressed and go downstairs to the courtyard to have a hearty breakfast and enjoy the morning coolness. It was going to be a hot day, and the master of the house feared that he would not catch the saving coolness. 20 minutes later, the man, his hair already covered with gray, came downstairs to the courtyard of the huge mansion. He gives important instructions to his faithful servants and sits down at the round table by the pool. Breakfast is already waiting for him on the glass table: porridge on milk, fresh fruit, and warm coffee with milk. After breakfast, the owner of the mansion decides to take a morning walk and goes to the nearest kiosk. He plans to buy some fashion magazines and relax in the courtyard of the house in the company of his lover. A little later, at lunchtime, he has a tennis practice scheduled and the man decides to hurry, lest he miss the opportunity to swing a racket before the terrible heat covers the city. The man quickly put on his light suit, cream pants and a black t-shirt, and put black sunglasses over his eyes so that no one would recognize him on the street. Usually, a few gawkers crowded around his house, but the man never resorted to calling the police or, for example, sicking the guards on people. The owner of the mansion was a completely open person, but today he was in no mood to socialize with anyone. The man walked out of his Villa Casuarina mansion and took a leisurely stroll to the nearest newsstand. On the way, he exchanged words with a few acquaintances and gave one of them the time. Usually the man sent his assistant to pick up the press, but today he wanted to pick up the magazines himself. He walked to a small newsstand and bought a couple of fashion magazines and a fresh newspaper. When the gray-haired man already approached the house and took the key out of his pocket to open the gate, an unfamiliar voice sounded behind him. "Hey, you," exclaimed a man's voice, and the owner of the mansion involuntarily turned around. Coming straight at him with a broad stride was a young man in a red cap and round spectacles. He was pointing a pistol at the man without a shadow of doubt. Before the owner of the mansion could call for help, a loud gunshot rang out and the man fell on the stone steps right in front of the mansion gate. Then, another shot rang out. This time it was a test shot. The perpetrator, satisfied that the deed was done, adjusted his round-rimmed glasses, stowed the gun in his backpack, and ran straight from the scene. His name was Andrew Cunanan. The man who had recently been enjoying the morning sun was now lying on the ground, bleeding. And his name was Gianni Versace. Chapter 1. Gianni Versace died at Jackson Memorial Hospital on July 15, 1997 at 9:21 a.m. The great designer died right on the operating table as several doctors fought in vain for his life. The news that the designer had been murdered immediately spread around the world. Many news, entertainment, and sports channels that day interrupted normal broadcasting and announced that Gianni Versace had been killed on the doorstep of an unguarded house. Virtually everyone who had anything to do with the fashion world took this tragedy very personally. No one could believe that Gianni was gone, and most importantly, he was brutally murdered right at the gates of his own mansion. Gianni Versace was without a doubt a great man. He was born on December 2, 1946 in southern Italy in the small town of Reggio di Calabria. Father Antonio and mother Francesca had sufficient capital to bring up their son. The head of the family was the owner of an electrical appliance store, and his mother was engaged in her own tailoring studio, Francesca Versace L. His childhood years were uneventful. His parents gave Gianni to the best school, which could not afford not everyone in a small town, while Gianni's mother was not stingy and paid for the best drawing circles for her son. From the age of 12, Gianni constantly went to work with his mother and helped her to select fabrics, go shopping, and even began to take orders for tailoring from customers. As soon as Gianni finished school, he went to the capital, in order to enter the faculty of architecture, but soon realized that he was not interested in this occupation and returned at 18 years old back to his mother to help her work in the atelier. Mother's fashion atelier required constant study of the fashion industry market, so Gianni quite often had to travel to fashion presentations in Paris, Milan and London, buying new fabrics from the most famous designers. Active activity in this direction brought noticeable results. In 1972, Gianni received an offer to create a collection of clothes for the company of Milanese entrepreneur Enzo Nicosia Florentine Flowers, for which he took up with great pleasure. Having achieved success, Gianni Versace decides to take part in several fashion shows. He always said that beauty will save the world and believed in it unconditionally. His big heart and soul completely belonged to fashion. His mother supported Gianni's passion for fashion with great pleasure and told her son that she was very proud of him and his many successes in this field. Since the mid-1970s, Gianni Versace has collaborated with such famous brands as Jenny, Mario Valentino, Callahan, and Complis. His popularity among the public is growing, critics have fewer and fewer claims to the young designer, and success has practically made his name famous. In his few interviews, Gianni Versace stated that he owed this success not only to his endless labor, but also to his mother, who for a very long time supported her son and always inspired him. Versace believed that his fashion house was created especially for strong and beautiful women, just like his mother. In 1978, Gianni Versace pledges all his hard-earned money into a company called Versace S.p.A., but the main event of that year was not that at all, but the show of the first fashion collection of clothes for women, held in Milan. The collection of clothes withstood all the comments of critics, and was declared one of the best, which gave Versace a chance to open a fashion boutique on one of the main streets of Milan. At this time he starts an active advertising campaign, which very soon put his clothes on a par with the greatest names in the history of fashion. Famous models such as Naomi Campbell and Claudia Schiffer take part in the shows. Chapter 3. Future serial killer Andrew Philip Cunanan was born on August 31, 1969 in the wealthy suburb of San Diego, California. The boy was the fourth and youngest child in the family. His mother was an Italian-American and his father a Filipino-American. All who knew Andrew in childhood and adolescence noted that he grew up very cute and very intelligent boy. According to teachers, when tested on an IQ test, Andrew showed a result of 147 points, with an average of 100 to 110. Andrew's family relations were rather strange. His sisters and brothers were very cold towards him, often bullied him and even cruelly abused the defenseless boy several times. Andrew's mother tried to give her son the best and protected him from the attacks of other children, but because of mental illness soon began to forget about Andrew, and the boy was left alone with his problems. He felt superfluous, which, no doubt, greatly affected his psychological state. Andrew's father always told him that he was a special boy and that's why he studied in the best school, unlike other children, and he had a bright future. Andrew took genuine pleasure in receiving his father's praise, and the latter fed him endless promises of success and wealth. But that stopped in 1988, when the father of the family was found guilty of huge embezzlement at work. Cunanan Sr. instantly fled in an unknown direction, but for his machinations had to answer for the family. No, they were not robbed, but the account was quickly zeroed out, and expensive things and cars were confiscated. So Andrew had nothing to pay for his studies, and he was already used to a luxurious life, expensive clothes, luxury. For a young man who was abandoned by the only protector in the family, it was a blow to the heart. For a very long period of time Andrew withdrew into himself, stopped communicating with relatives and even forgot about old friends who tried to bring him out of a long depression. Soon, Andrew returned home from university, where a terrible scandal broke out. The thing is that his mother heard rumors that her beloved son had become gay and did not hide his orientation from society. Word for word, an temperamental Italian woman cursed her youngest son and pointed him at the door. Andrew slammed this very door and left his father's house, leaving a mentally ill mother in the care of his brothers and sisters. They, by the way, did not hide the joy that Andrew finally left his father's house. Left without a family, Andrew did not grieve long, and went on the first flight to San Francisco, where lived one of his first lovers. Although Andrew's friend became his outlet, but was not a rich man, so Cunanan decided to go into escorting and began to engage in escorting rich and very influential clients. His services were used by celebrities, the rich and even some politicians who showered him with money and all the benefits. However, Cunanan was not particularly keen, preferring to have no more than 2 partners at a time. And since he was very pretty, almost educated, naughty and passionate, his partners usually became his lovers for a long time. Well, and when they had to part, Andrew easily found a new lover. After a while, Cunanan became a member of high society. Once he was even seen in the same box with Gianni Versace at the premiere of the opera Capriccio. Who invited him there, it is still unknown. Maybe the fashion designer himself, who has never been shy about his homosexual tendencies. Or maybe someone else from the gay fraternity. But Versace and Cunanan were clearly acquainted, otherwise the young men could hardly get into a private box together with such a star of the modeling business. Chapter 3. For almost 10 years Cunanan lived like cheese in butter. But in the winter of 1997, the life of a young and very promising guy suddenly collapsed. What happened in January-February of that year, opinions differ. Someone says that at that time in Andrew's life there was a drama, because he quarreled with his lover and received a strong mental trauma. Andrew could no longer look for new partners and was heavily hooked on drugs, which before and did not bend. Moreover, after law enforcement began to investigate his life, they discovered that Cunanan was also dealing drugs. But there was a more serious reason that explains why Andrew went off the rails. Someone in his circle told him that he had AIDS. Who told Cunanan about it remains unknown. Undoubtedly, this was a blow to Andrew, who had found his place among the rich and successful gay men. Now the entrance to this society could close, leaving the guy without means of subsistence, because he was not used to work. He was used to the fact that all the benefits were brought to him on a silver platter. Unexpectedly for Andrew's friends in 1997, he gathers them in a restaurant and announces that he needs to urgently leave town. "Where are you going? What are you planning to do?" asked one of the young man's friends. "To Minneapolis," Andrew answered quickly. "I have some business to take care of." What he meant by the last phrase, the questioner realized a few days later, when the newspapers reported the violent deaths of two homosexuals. Cunanan arrived in Minneapolis on April 25, 1997, and went straight to his former lover, the famous architect David Madsen. The latter received him, and the next day he called his friends for dinner. At this dinner was present and another former lover Andrew, Jeffrey Trail. What happened there is not known. But the result was that Trail was killed by a pistol shot to the head. His body was found at the Madsen home, and the homeowner was not present. His body was found 2 days later near Minnesota Lake. Also with a bullet in his head. Chapter 4. The murder of two young men shook the city, and the police quickly had their first and foremost suspect. As early as the beginning of May, Andrew Cunanan was already on the list of America's most wanted criminals. His portraits were placed in many newspapers and shown on television. But for a long time he managed to evade the police. Why did this happen? The answer is simple. Even in school and college years Andrew liked to change, dress up and transform into different people. At the same time, he was a great liar. That is why he managed only long to hide from the police, who announced a serious hunt for him. Soon it turned out that investigators believed that first Cunanan was going to settle accounts with all his lovers, who could infect him with AIDS. And then to deal with the banner of homosexuality, his own words, Gianni Versace. Before getting to Gianni Versace, Cunanan massacred a 72-year-old construction worker named Lee Miglin from Chicago. He was mauled and murdered on May 4, 1997. Miglin's death was quite agonizing. Cunanan first pounded him over the head with a hammer and then tortured him for a long time, cutting off chunks of flesh and limbs with scissors, with experts determining that until the last Lee Miglin was alive and suffering terribly. When the third victim was finished, Andrew took Miglin's car and moved on. 5 days later, Cunanan happened to hear on the radio about the search for Miglin's car. Despite the detective's strict prohibition against releasing information about Andrew, reporters still managed to learn that Miglin's car had been stolen, and this information quickly appeared on the radio and in the newspapers. At the time, Andrew was in the state of New Jersey and was developing a plan of revenge against the great designer. When Andrew realized that he was about to be arrested, he took the first country road that led him to the rural cemetery in the town of Pennsville. The cemetery's caretaker, 45-year-old William Reese, came out to greet the unexpected guest and offer assistance. Everyone who knew William claimed he was an unusually compassionate and kind man. But the killer was interested in the caretaker's truck. He did not hesitate to shoot Reese twice with a gun stolen from Jeffrey Trail, and then took the truck from the deceased and moved on. Reese's truck was reported missing 2 days after the murder. The truck was soon located, but Andrew was not in it. Why? Yes, because journalists again managed to dig up information about the investigation, and the criminal had to lie low. Andrew resurfaced only 2 months later in Miami Beach, where the most sensational murder took place. Cunanan spent quite a long time guarding Gianni Versace at his villa in Miami. This is quite a fashionable neighborhood, but Andrew managed not to attract attention to himself, even taking into account the fact that he was wanted by the police, and the face of an attractive maniac was painted on almost every pole. July 15, 1997, Versace jumped out of the house to buy magazines. After returning from the kiosk and the fatal shots rang out, Cunanan shot twice directly into the fashion designer's face. Approaching the house, Versace D'Amico, Gianni's lover, became an unwitting witness to the murder and immediately raised the alarm. But Cunanan managed to escape. The news of the murder of a famous couturier shook the whole of Miami. The city of the rich was instantly sealed off in such a way that no mouse could get through. After which began a total cleanup. The killer was discovered in the floating hotel on July 23, 1997. But as soon as the police SWAT team went to storm the hotel, Cunanan put the barrel of the gun in his mouth and pulled the trigger. It is noteworthy that no signs of HIV infection or AIDS were found in Cunanan during the autopsy. And this became a reason for some journalists to strongly question the claims of the police and the FBI that Cunanan was the killer of Versace. Conclusion. After the death of Andrew Cunanan in the American society quickly appeared a lot of interesting versions about other possible reasons for the death of the fashion designer. It should be noted that the most popular was the version that the unwanted fashion designer was removed by the mafia. And the corpse Cunanan was simply planted, so that law enforcement agencies lightning closed the case and did not dig further in search of the true culprit. And it's a pretty good theory. The whole point is that back in the early 90s in America there was a scandal, the essence of which was that some fashion houses laundered money to organized crime in different ways and under different pretexts. Among others called and House of Versace, which was founded by Gianni. The fashion designer himself flatly denied these rumors, and no one has ever found serious evidence of the involvement of the fashion house to the mafia. There is no doubt that the death of Gianni Versace from the very beginning was a planned murder. The designer died at the hands of a serial killer, who had been hiding from the police for a very long time and was preparing his plan of revenge against a man who was not even involved in the life path chosen by Cunanan.